If you're receiving this email, you are somebody that I've worked with, you're a friend, you're somebody I respect, somebody that I might trust, or you're somebody who happens to have made your interest in the American warfighter and our American military and the men and women who serve us every day. You might have made it an interest, and therefore you're subject to me being able to find your email. Today, as we're in the year of the 250th anniversary of this nation, I want to tell you 3 stories. And one of those stories begins 250 years ago today. The other is a modern story, and that story is the story of 2 Navy SEALs. Both very different, both who've dedicated our lives to the safety and wellness of the American warfighter. And the third story is really your story, and it's all of our story as we are entering the next great phase of what it means to be an American in the middle of the largest and most impactful American defense investment cycle that this country has ever known. And that story could be your story of service, a story that you want to tell that relates to the 3 that I'm going to tell today, or it could be a story yet to be developed. But either way, that's why you have me in your inbox. So 250 years ago today, the British general Henry Clinton invaded a tiny island off the coast of South Carolina, Sullivan's Island, exactly 250 years to this day. He was defeated. Now, he was defeated because the water was too deep and those British, they really can't swim. But 9 days later, he was defeated again, in a defeat that bought the American Revolutionary Forces 2 years by some estimates in staving the British off in the American South, a part of the colonies that was extremely strategic to the British Armed Forces. It was called their Southern Strategy. And the defeat that they suffered at Sullivan's Island was unexpected and brutal. And it was the result of 2 American generals, well, a general and a soldier, who defied direct orders. The orders came from General Lee, who told him to abandon the fort because it was the British Army, and they were back, and they had 260 cannons and a ton of men, and they had a half-built fort, not a lot of weaponry, and even fewer men. And the General Moultrie decided not to on the words of a soldier called Francis Marion. And Francis Marion would later become known as a swamp fox. And so committed were those 2 to their own abilities and to their own ability to not just defeat the British, but to engineer a solution that defeated them and severely reduced American casualties, that they defied orders. Now, how did they do this? They did it because Francis Marion knew the swamp, and he had fought in the French and Indian War. And what he knew was that palmetto absorbed blast, and that palmetto with sand was almost impossible to deal with and to penetrate. It took more firepower than most people could spare to actually make an impact. And so they fortified the fort with their own structures made of palmetto and sand, compacted, the heavy rains being used not to their detriment, but to further strengthen their position. Those 260 cannons were wasted. Francis Marion became known as one of the forefathers of American guerrilla warfare, which of course is a great-great-grandfather of our own American Special Operation Forces today. And what we learned then was that blast was a real problem. It wasn't just the one person being hit. It wasn't just the actual physical impact. It was the shock. Palmetto quite literally absorbs the blast. Now, 250 years later, we're still talking about blast, and we're still talking about its impact on American soldiers, but we're not talking about it quite enough. And we're talking about it primarily in the context of known traumatic brain injuries. Since 2000, when we started studying traumatic brain injuries, there have been 505 cases of American soldiers diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury. The most severe case of a traumatic brain injury came from an American warfighter who was never in active duty combat, or he never saw hand-to-hand combat. Now, how can that be? And that's what brings us to the 2 warfighters that I want to talk about today, both of whom have given their lives in service and defense of this country. The story begins with 2 Navy SEALs. One, Ryan Larkin, decorated, multiple tours, no longer with us. And even in his death, he continued to serve his country. Ryan Larkin was discharged honorably from the Naval Forces in 2016. In one of his final communications with the Navy, he discussed with them that there was something wrong with his brain. His mood had changed. There was something wrong, and he was convinced of it. No Navy medical forces or private doctors could find anything wrong with his brain. After he chose to take his life, he asked that his body be dedicated to science, because so convinced was him that something was wrong with his brain, he wanted to make sure that there was no other soldier, fallen or otherwise, no warfighter or their family, that would go through what he and his family went through. What they found when the autopsy on Ryan's brain was completed was that there were several, I'm not exactly sure how many, but there was a significant amount of microscarring on his brain. Scarring that didn't come from one major impact, it didn't come from one major injury, and it couldn't be picked up on an MRI. It came from prolonged exposure to low-grade blasts and to mid-grade blasts. Ryan's death served as a catalyst for a problem that Michael Eaves, the founder of Explosive Blast Shield Systems, and the reason I'm sending this email today, while this was an experience he had, Ryan certainly kicked off his desire to build his own solution, just like Francis Marion had, for a problem that he had experienced himself. But until Ryan died, no one would have known this was happening because the MRI did not show it. And his family's dedication to making his life mean something even more than it already did, having given the ultimate sacrifice for this country and dedicated his life to keeping us safe and our rights protected. We wouldn't have known without him making that choice to dedicate his body to science. When Michael learned this, already having served 20 years as a chief petty officer and having worked as a medic, he was in a position and was currently training. He was in a position to actually engineer his solution. So he spent his own money, his own time, and developed the first product of EBSS. He went on to develop a product specific to the more advanced blast exposure that occurs in a kill house scenario, which I know is not the politically correct word, but it's the word I'm using for this video, and I'm quite confident that everybody here is going to survive. The exposure in all of these scenarios is repeated and it's prolonged. The United States military is aware of the damage that prolonged blast exposure does to our warfighters, but the training is necessary. And while funding continues for the research of these injuries and of these microscopic tears and how exactly they occur and how they can be identified and what they do to the brain and treatment patterns, not as much funding is going into actual solutions. We've discussed discussions of virtual reality solutions, discussions of modified weapons. And the situation is that we are in conversations with EBSS. First of all, we're lucky enough to be in a position of funding, but we are also in a position of having great conversations with all of the branches of the military and various invested parties that are committed to warfighter safety and the solution that is practical and that is here now and that immediately reduces the damage and reduces the exposure of blast overpressure. And those solutions have been engineered by Michael and his team. One of the things when getting something across the line and getting it done is the stories. It is just a fact that we respond as things when we can put a face to it, when there is a way that we can relate. And we think it's important that those stories aren't just told in terms of the stories that are being told too late. The stories of current servicemen, former servicemen and women, of what this experience is really like, of this continuous training that involves exposure to these blasts, whether it's a shoulder-held rocket or it is an actual bomb exposure. This is a fundamental part, particularly of our Special Operations Forces training, and I'm going to send a follow-up video that has Michael taking you through exactly what this does. But the purpose of my video is that oftentimes, if you're receiving this, we're asking each other for help somewhere. We're asking for an introduction, we're asking for funding, we're asking for the things that networks and friendships and relationships are there for. But today I'm asking you to help me have 250 stories of American warfighters that are relevant to this project. And they don't even necessarily have to be, but relevant to the mental health, the brain health, the well-being of American warfighters. There are more warfighters than we know suffering from repercussions, not just of their sacrifice, but of the work that they needed to do to prepare to make that sacrifice. And so I would ask that you forward this video, forward the information that I will share from Michael and that I've attached to this email to other people that you know that are interested in having these stories told, interested in being involved with the company in some way, interested in just having a chat. And I will look forward to talking to all of you about this, to seeing this email forwarded, and of course I will share a short version on social media, but brevity's never been my thing, guys, especially not when it comes to my special interest of this country. So, thank you all.